So you want to own a gym. Racks of weights, rows of treadmills, and a few hundred people paying you every single month for the privilege of walking through your door. Best of all, most of them won't even show up. Sounds like the easiest business in the world. Sell something people barely use. Here's the twist. That they don't show up fact isn't a side benefit of the gym business, it's the entire business model. And once you understand that, almost everything else about how gyms make money and why so many of them go bankrupt anyway starts to make sense. Today, we're breaking down exactly what it costs to open a gym, how a membership actually turns into profit, why January is both the best and most dangerous month of the year for a gym owner, and why some of the biggest gym chains in the country have gone bankrupt more than once. Let's start with what it actually costs to open the doors in the first place, because the range here is enormous. A small boutique studio, think a yoga space, a spin studio, or a CrossFit box, squeezed into a modest commercial unit can get up and running for somewhere in the range of $50,000 to $150,000. That covers a lease deposit, some flooring, a sound system, and a limited set of specialized equipment. A full-service commercial gym is a completely different animal. Once you're talking about a large space with a full free weight section, dozens of cardio machines, locker rooms with showers, and group fitness studios, total startup costs commonly land somewhere between $150,000 and $500,000 or more, depending on the size and the city. Equipment alone is one of the biggest line items. Commercial-grade treadmills, strength machines, and racks are not the same price as what you'd buy for a home gym, and a mid-sized facility can easily spend well over $100,000 just outfitting the floor. Then there's the lease. Gyms need a lot of square footage relative to the revenue each square foot generates, and that changes the math. Traditional big box gyms typically generate somewhere around $50 to $100 per square foot in annual revenue. Boutique studios, because they charge much higher monthly rates for a smaller footprint, can generate $100 to $350 per square foot. That gap matters enormously when you're negotiating a lease, because your landlord doesn't care what kind of gym you're running, they care what the market rate is for that neighborhood. And a low revenue per square foot business model has far less room to absorb a bad lease. Before you even open, you're also paying for build-out, flooring that can handle dropped weights, mirrors, HVAC systems powerful enough to handle a room full of people generating heat, plumbing for locker rooms, and often months of rent before you ever collect a single membership payment. Now, here's where the business gets genuinely interesting, because a gym membership is really a bet on human behavior, and the bet works in the owner's favor. Say a gym charges $50 a month. If every single member showed up regularly, used the equipment hard, needed constant staff supervision, and wore down the machines at full capacity, the economics would be brutal. You'd need an enormous facility to handle everyone at once, with staffing to match. But that's not what happens. Industry data consistently shows that a huge share of members, often described in the fitness industry as the class of the never-shows, sign up with the best of intentions and then rarely, if ever, come back after the first few weeks. This is the foundational math of the entire industry. A gym doesn't sell workouts. It sells a subscription to an intention. The member is paying for the version of themselves that goes 4 times a week. The gym is planning around the reality that most people don't. That gap between what's paid for and what's used is where a huge amount of the profit margin actually lives. This is also why the break-even math on a gym looks the way it does. A facility with, say, $15,000 in monthly fixed costs and an average of $50 in monthly revenue per member needs roughly 300 paying members just to break even. But most successful gym owners don't target the bare break-even number. They target somewhere in the range of 500 to 1,000 members for a traditional gym, precisely because a meaningful share of those members will rarely set foot inside, and the facility was never built to handle all of them showing up on the same Tuesday evening at 6 p.m. Membership dues are the base of the model, but a well-run modern gym stacks several more layers on top. Personal training is often the single highest margin add-on in the building. Trainers get paid a fraction of what a training package costs, and the rest is margin for the gym. Data from the industry shows a large share of personal training revenue is booked in the early morning and early evening hours, the exact windows when working professionals train before or after their jobs, which is why smart gyms price those slots at a premium. Retail and supplements are a smaller but meaningful stream. Industry standard markup on supplements commonly runs 40 to 60%, and on branded apparel and accessories, markups of 100% or more aren't unusual. Corporate wellness contracts are a quieter but sometimes very lucrative stream. A gym signs a deal with a local employer to give their staff discounted or free access in exchange for a predictable monthly payment from the company itself, rather than from dozens of individual members. A single contract with a mid-sized company can be worth several $1,000s a month, arriving as a clean payment instead of 50 small ones. Tiered membership pricing rounds out the model. Most gyms deliberately present 3 membership options side by side: a bare-bones tier, a mid-tier, and a premium tier, because the presence of the cheap and expensive options pushes the majority of members toward the middle option, which is usually the one with the best margin for the gym.
Now the expense side, and there's one number here that matters more than almost anything else: churn. Churn is the percentage of members who cancel every month. Gym industry churn rates commonly run somewhere between 30 to 50% annually, which in practical terms means a gym is often losing something like 3 to 5% of its total membership base every single month. A gym with 1,000 members can realistically lose 300 to 500 of them over the course of a year, and every one of those cancellations has to be replaced just to keep the lights on at the same level before any actual growth happens. This is why acquisition marketing is a permanent recurring cost in this business, not a one-time expense you pay when you first open. Industry estimates suggest it costs somewhere around 5 to 7 times more to acquire a brand new member than it does to keep an existing one happy. That single fact quietly explains almost every retention strategy in the modern fitness industry. The classes, the community events, the apps, the loyalty programs, they're not just nice extras. They're a direct hedge against the single most expensive line item most gym owners underestimate before they open. On top of churn, there's the fixed cost structure that doesn't care how many members show up on a given day. Rent, industry guidance suggests, commonly eats up somewhere around 15 to 25% of total revenue. Staffing costs typically run higher still, often 35 to 45% of revenue once you count front desk staff, cleaning, and trainers on payroll. Equipment maintenance and eventual replacement usually accounts for another 5 to 10%, and marketing another 5 to 10% on an ongoing basis. Put all of that together, and here's the number that surprises a lot of new owners. Even in a successful, well-run gym, typical profit margins land somewhere around 10 to 20% for a traditional commercial gym, and 20 to 35% for a lean boutique studio. That's a healthy margin by most service industry standards, but it's not the runaway, effortless cash machine the membership dues rolling in every month pitch makes it sound like. A large share of that incoming revenue is already spoken for the moment it hits the account. And then there's the seasonal trap almost every gym owner learns the hard way. January is by a wide margin the single best month of the year for new memberships. Resolution season drives a genuine surge in signups. But it's also the most dangerous month because a huge share of those January signups are exactly the never shows the whole business model depends on. And if a gym oversells itself based on January's number and staffs, equips, and expands around that peak, it can find itself with far more overhead than its actual year-round membership base can support once the January rush cancels in March. To see how this plays out at scale, it helps to look at what happened to some of the country's largest gym chains. Bally Total Fitness was, at its peak in the 2000s, one of the largest fitness chains in North America, with hundreds of locations and millions of members across the country. The company's business model leaned heavily on long-term membership contracts, locking members into multi-year commitments, often sold aggressively at the point of sign-up. For a while, this looked like a strength. Locked-in contracts meant predictable, guaranteed revenue regardless of whether members actually showed up. But that same structure became the company's undoing. Aggressive, contract-heavy sales tactics drew regulatory scrutiny and consumer complaints in multiple states, damaging the brand's reputation. Meanwhile, the fixed cost of maintaining hundreds of large format locations kept climbing, while member satisfaction and usage lagged. Bally filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2007, restructured, and then filed again in 2011, eventually being broken up and sold off in pieces. A chain that once seemed to have cracked the membership lock-in model discovered that a member trapped in a contract they resent is not the same thing as a member who's actually happy to keep paying. More recently, 24-Hour Gyms, another of the country's largest chains, filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy in 2020. The immediate trigger was the forced closure of gyms during the pandemic. A business built entirely on people physically walking through a door cannot survive months of that door being legally required to stay shut. But the deeper lesson analysts pointed to afterward was the same one that runs through this entire industry. A large format gym chain carries enormous fixed costs, rent on hundreds of large facilities, equipment, staff that don't disappear just because revenue does. When the revenue side of the ledger went to zero for months at a time, the fixed cost side kept running exactly as before, and the math simply didn't survive the gap. Both stories point to the same underlying truth. The gym business model works precisely because most members don't show up. But that same model is fragile in the other direction too. It depends on a large, steady base of members continuing to pay whether or not they're using the facility, and anything that disrupts that steady, semi-passive payments, whether it's a damaged brand reputation, an economic downturn, or a forced shutdown, hits a gym's fixed cost structure immediately, with almost no cushion to absorb the shock.
Not every fitness business has struggled, and the ones thriving today share a pattern. They stopped competing purely on square footage and equipment count and started competing on experience, community, and flexibility. The boutique fitness boom, CrossFit boxes, cycling studios, small group hit gyms, succeeded by flipping the traditional gym's economics. Instead of thousands of members paying a low monthly fee to use a giant facility, mostly alone, boutique studios serve far fewer members at a much higher price point, built around scheduled classes, tight community, and instructor-led experiences that are much harder to replicate at home or to quit out of boredom. Higher revenue per square foot with a smaller footprint means a fundamentally different, often more resilient cost structure. At the other end of the spectrum, ultra-budget gym chains took the opposite bet and leaned even harder into the never shows math, charging extremely low monthly fees, running with minimal staffing, and relying on sheer volume. Thousands of members per location, most of whom rarely visit, at a price point low enough that almost nobody bothers to cancel even when they've stopped going. Many gyms in the middle also diversified deliberately, adding hybrid digital memberships, on-demand class libraries, mobile apps for tracking and engagement, and corporate wellness contracts, all ways of either reducing churn directly or capturing revenue that doesn't depend on a member physically walking through the door on any given day.
So does owning a gym actually work as a business? The honest answer, as with most of the businesses we cover on this channel, depends heavily on which model and how disciplined the operator is about the numbers most people never think to ask about. In the good scenario, a gym finds the membership count and price point that matches its format, whether that's a lean boutique studio at 200 members paying $150 a month or a big box gym at 1,000+ members paying $40, keeps churn under control through genuine member experience rather than contract lock-in, layers in personal training, retail, and corporate contracts on top of base dues, and lets the gap between paid for and actually used capacity do quiet, steady work in its favor every single month. In the bad scenario, an owner overbuilds based on a January sign-up surge, underestimates just how expensive constant member replacement really is, leans on aggressive contracts instead of genuine retention, and finds that the same fixed costs that looked manageable at full membership become crushing the moment revenue dips, whether from a bad month, a damaged reputation, or a shock nobody could have planned for. The building, the equipment, and the racks of weights never really change. What changes is whether the gap between what members pay for and what they actually use is working for the owner or quietly working against them.